Isabella Lawson's trembling hands clutched the bouquet of white daisies as she stood in the small back room of Black Hawk's only church, the sound of gathering townsfolk filtering through the thin wooden walls. The year was 1876, and Colorado had just become a state, but Isabella's thoughts were far from celebration as she stared at her ashen reflection in the tarnished mirror. "You look beautiful, Miss Lawson," Mrs. Patterson, the seamstress, murmured as she adjusted the simple white dress that had been hastily altered for the occasion. Isabella could only nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. Beautiful she might appear, but this was to be no joyous union. The man waiting at the altar, Harold Whitfield, had systematically destroyed everything she held dear. 20 minutes, Mrs. Patterson announced before slipping out of the room. Left alone, Isabella's mind raced back to that fateful day 6 months ago when Whitfield had arrived in Black Hawk. He'd come with promises of investment in the struggling mining town, flashing enough gold to make the mayor and town council fall over themselves to accommodate his every wish. Isabella's father, Joseph Lawson, had been the only one to question Whitfield's motives. Joseph Lawson had been the town's banker for 15 years, building a reputation for fairness and prudence. When Whitfield proposed a scheme to consolidate the smaller mining operations, Joseph had voiced concerns. 2 days later, mysterious documents surfaced suggesting Joseph had been embezzling from the bank for years. Isabella knew it was a lie. Her father was the most honest man she'd ever known, but the evidence had been damning, fabricated though it was. The scandal broke him. Within a month, Joseph Lawson died of what the doctor called a broken heart, though Isabella knew it was shame that killed him, shame for a crime he never committed. With her father gone and the family name disgraced, the bank was seized, their home repossessed, and at 22, Isabella found herself alone with nothing but the clothes on her back. She'd been forced to take a position as a laundress at the hotel, scrubbing sheets until her hands cracked and bled. Then came Whitfield's proposition 3 weeks ago. He would restore her family name, claim he'd discovered evidence exonerating her father, and return a portion of their property if she would marry him. The town would see it as an act of charity and redemption. "It's a generous offer, Miss Lawson," Mayor Billings had said when he delivered the proposal, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "More than generous, considering your circumstances." Isabella knew what it really was, the final piece in Whitfield's plan to own everything and everyone in Black Hawk. With Joseph Lawson's daughter as his wife, even those who had quietly questioned Whitfield's sudden rise to power would be silenced. She'd refused at first. But then, the accidents began. A shelf nearly crushed her at the general store. A runaway wagon almost struck her crossing Main Street. The message was clear: marry Whitfield or suffer the consequences, and so here she stood, about to marry the devil himself. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Patterson returning to escort her to the altar. Instead, a young woman Isabella recognized as Sally, one of the waitresses from the Silver Dollar Saloon, slipped inside. "Miss Lawson," Sally whispered urgently, "there's someone who wants to speak with you, says it's important." "I can't leave now, Sally." "The ceremony—" "It's about Mr. Whitfield," Sally interrupted. "Please just come to the back door." Curiosity overrode caution. Isabella followed Sally through the narrow hallway to the church's rear entrance. Standing there, hat in hand, was a man Isabella had seen around town but never spoken to. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, this was Ethan Ashwood, a cowboy who worked at the Peterson Ranch outside town. "Miss Lawson," he said, his voice low and urgent, I apologize for the intrusion, but I couldn't let this happen without speaking to you first. Mr. Ashwood, I don't understand. I know what Whitfield did to your father, Ethan said, his words tumbling out in a rush. I have proof he fabricated the evidence against him. Isabella felt her knees weaken. Proof? What kind of proof? Letters. Correspondence between Whitfield and a forger in Denver, the man he hired to create the false bank records. Ethan reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. I found these among Whitfield's things. How did you get access to his belongings? Isabella asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. I've been working as a hand at his new ranch for the past month, Ethan explained. But before that, I was a Pinkerton detective in Denver. I came here tracking Whitfield for another case. He's pulled this scheme in 3 other mining towns across Colorado. Isabella's hands shook as she took the envelope. Inside were several letters clearly detailing how Whitfield had orchestrated her father's downfall. Why are you showing me this now? She whispered, anger and hope warring within her. The ceremony is about to begin. Because I couldn't stand by and watch another innocent person destroyed by that man, Ethan said, his jaw tightening. Miss Lawson, you don't have to go through with this marriage. With these letters, we can expose him for what he is. He'll deny it, Isabella said bitterly. He owns half the town now. Then we'll leave, Ethan suggested, his eyes meeting hers. I have a horse ready. We can ride to Denver, present this evidence to the proper authorities. Isabella hesitated. Why would you risk this for me? You don't even know me. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, determination, perhaps, or something deeper. I knew your father. Not well, but enough to know he was a good man. And I've watched you these past months, holding your head high despite everything. That takes courage. Before Isabella could respond, the church's front doors opened, and she heard Mayor Billings's voice calling for the bride. Time had run out. Miss Lawson, Ethan said softly, the choice is yours, but know that if you walk down that aisle, Whitfield wins. Isabella looked down at the letters in her hand, then at the wedding dress she wore. 6 months of pain, humiliation, and loss crashed through her mind. Her father deserved justice, and she deserved better than a lifetime bound to his destroyer. I need 5 minutes, she whispered to Ethan. Wait for me. She hurried back to the preparation room, her heart hammering. Quickly, she changed back into her simple work dress, tucking the letters into her pocket. Through the window, she could see guests filing into the church, Whitfield's business associates, town officials who'd turned their backs on her father, and townspeople who'd come to gawk at the scandalous union. Another knock at the door. Isabella, it's time. Mayor Billings's voice sounded impatient. One moment, she called, desperately searching the room for anything she might need. Her eyes fell on a small portrait of her father that she'd brought for courage. She grabbed it, along with her mother's silver locket, the only possession she had left. Mayor Billings knocked again, more insistently this time. The groom is waiting, Isabella. Taking a deep breath, Isabella opened the door. Mayor Billings's expression shifted from irritation to confusion as he took in her changed attire. What is the meaning of this? Where is your wedding dress? There isn't going to be a wedding, Isabella said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. Mayor Billings's face reddened. Now see here, young lady. Mr. Whitfield has been more than generous. Mr. Whitfield is a fraud and a criminal, Isabella interrupted, pushing past him toward the back door where Ethan waited. And I have the proof. The mayor grabbed her arm. You'll regret this, Isabella. Think about what you're doing. I've thought about nothing else for weeks, she replied, wrenching free of his grip. As she hurried down the hallway, she could hear the mayor shouting for help. The church's back door was just ahead, and through it, she could see Ethan holding the reins of 2 horses. Suddenly, Harold Whitfield stepped into her path, his thin lips curved in a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "Going somewhere, my dear?" Isabella froze, her heart pounding. "Step aside, Harold. I know what you did to my father." Whitfield chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "What I did was offer you salvation from the gutter, ungrateful girl. After today, no one will believe a word you say against me." "They will when they see these," Isabella countered, patting her pocket where the letters rested. Something dangerous flashed in Whitfield's eyes. He lunged forward, grabbing for her pocket, but Isabella ducked away. They grappled briefly, Whitfield's fingers digging painfully into her arm as he tried to restrain her. The back door burst open, and Ethan Ashwood stood framed in the doorway, his imposing figure momentarily halting Whitfield's advance. "She's marrying no one today, Whitfield," Ethan declared, his voice carrying down the narrow hallway to where several wedding guests had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Whitfield recovered quickly, his face settling into a mask of benevolent concern. "Mr. Ashwood, isn't it? I believe you're interrupting a private moment between myself and my bride-to-be. Perhaps you've had too much to drink." "I'm perfectly sober," Ethan replied evenly, "which is why I can see clearly what kind of man you really are." Whitfield turned to address the gathering crowd. "This poor young man seems confused. Sheriff, perhaps you could escort him out so we can proceed with the ceremony." Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Mr. Ashwood, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." "Not without Miss Lawson," Ethan said firmly, "and not before everyone hears the truth about Harold Whitfield." Isabella seized the moment to break away from Whitfield. "I have letters," she announced, her voice ringing through the church. "Letters proving that Harold Whitfield conspired to frame my father. He hired a forger to create false evidence." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Whitfield's facade cracked briefly before he regained his composure. "This is absurd," he scoffed. "The girl is clearly distraught. Her father's crimes and death have affected her mind." "My father committed no crimes," Isabella said, drawing the letters from her pocket. "But you did, Harold, and now everyone will know." She handed the first letter to Sheriff Taylor, whose expression darkened as he scanned its contents. "Where did you get these, Miss Lawson?" "I found them," Ethan interjected, stepping closer. "In Whitfield's desk at his ranch. I've been working there this past month." "Stealing private correspondence is a crime," Whitfield sputtered, his confidence beginning to waver as he saw the sheriff's reaction to the letters. "So is fraud," Sheriff Taylor replied grimly. "And based on what I'm reading here, that's the least of your offenses." More letters were passed through the crowd, gasps and exclamations following in their wake. Whitfield's face had gone pale, his eyes darting around the church like a cornered animal seeking escape. "This changes nothing," he hissed at Isabella. "I still own half this town. Who do you think they'll believe, a successful businessman or a disgraced banker's daughter and some drifting cowboy?" "They'll believe the evidence," Ethan said calmly. "And there's more where that came from. The Pinkerton agency has been building a case against you for months." At the mention of the Pinkertons, Whitfield's composure collapsed entirely. With unexpected speed, he shoved past Sheriff Taylor and bolted for the front doors of the church. "Stop him," the sheriff shouted, but Whitfield was already outside, running toward the hitching post where his horse waited. Ethan sprinted after him, with Isabella and several others following close behind. They emerged from the church just in time to see Whitfield mounting his horse. "He's getting away," someone shouted as Whitfield kicked his mount into motion, but Ethan was already swinging onto his own horse. "Get to the sheriff's office," he called to Isabella. "I'll bring him back." Isabella watched as Ethan galloped after Whitfield, the two riders disappearing around a corner in a cloud of dust. The wedding guests poured out of the church, the intended ceremony forgotten in the wake of the unfolding drama. Sheriff Taylor approached Isabella, still holding the damning letters. "Miss Lawson, I owe you an apology. It appears we've all been deceived by Mr. Whitfield." Isabella nodded, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "My father deserved better." "Yes, he did," the sheriff agreed solemnly, "and we'll make this right, I promise you that." The next hour passed in a blur as Isabella gave her statement at the sheriff's office, explaining everything she knew about Whitfield's scheme. As the truth emerged, town officials who had been so quick to condemn her father now fell over themselves to express their regret and assure her of their support. Isabella received their apologies with quiet dignity, but inside, her thoughts were with Ethan Ashwood. The man who had risked everything to help her, a virtual stranger, now risked his life pursuing Whitfield through potentially dangerous terrain. Just as dusk was falling, a commotion outside drew everyone to the windows. Ethan Ashwood was riding into town, leading Whitfield's horse. The businessman was slumped over in the saddle, his hands bound behind his back. Sheriff Taylor hurried outside, Isabella following close behind. "You caught him," the sheriff said, relief evident in his voice. "Tried to lose me in the hills," Ethan explained as he dismounted. "But he doesn't know the terrain like I do." He nodded toward Whitfield. "He took a spill when his horse stumbled. Nothing serious, but he might have a few bruises to match his wounded pride." Two deputies helped the subdued Whitfield down from his horse. The man who had terrorized Isabella for months now looked small and defeated. "Harold Whitfield," Sheriff Taylor announced formally, "you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy against Joseph Lawson. There may be more charges forthcoming." As Whitfield was led away, his eyes met Isabella's one last time. There was no remorse there, only cold hatred. Isabella stood her ground, refusing to look away until he was inside the jailhouse. When she finally turned, she found Ethan Ashwood watching her, admiration clear in his expression. "You were very brave today, Miss Lawson," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you," Isabella replied. "How can I ever thank you?" "Seeing Whitfield face justice is thanks enough," Ethan assured her. "Your father deserved that much." Isabella studied the man before her, seeing him truly for the first time. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with his physical prowess. "The Pinkertons," she said suddenly. "You mentioned you were with them. Are you still?" Ethan shook his head. "I left the agency 6 months ago, came west looking for something else." His eyes held hers for a moment before he glanced away. "Though I kept an eye out for men like Whitfield, old habits. What will you do now?" Isabella asked, suddenly concerned that this man who had changed her life might simply ride out of it. "I've been thinking about buying some land," Ethan said, surprising her. "There's a small spread for sale outside of town. Good water, decent grazing. I've saved enough from my Pinkerton days to make a start." Relief washed over Isabella, followed by a wave of uncertainty about her own future. "As for me, I suppose I'll need to find somewhere to stay tonight. The boarding house, perhaps." "What about your home?" Ethan asked. "With Whitfield's schemes exposed, wouldn't your property revert to you?" "Perhaps eventually, after legal proceedings," Isabella sighed. "But that could take months." Mayor Billings, who had been hovering nearby, cleared his throat. "Actually, Miss Lawson, in light of today's revelations, the town council would like to expedite the return of your property. We can begin the process immediately." Isabella's eyes widened in surprise. "That's very kind of you, Mayor." "It's the least we can do," he mumbled, shame coloring his features. "Your father was a good man. We should have stood by him." As night fell over Black Hawk, Isabella found herself walking toward her childhood home for the first time in months, Ethan Ashwood at her side. The mayor had given her the key, along with profuse apologies and assurances that the town would do everything possible to restore her family's good name. "It feels strange," Isabella admitted as they approached the modest but well-built house at the edge of town. "Going back after everything that's happened. You don't have to stay there tonight if it's too difficult," Ethan suggested. "Mrs. Peterson at the ranch would be happy to offer you a room until you're ready." Isabella shook her head. "No, I need to do this. Face the memories, both good and bad." They reached the front porch, and Isabella's hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key into the lock. The door swung open with a familiar creak, revealing the darkened interior of the home where she had grown up. Would you mind coming in with me?" she asked Ethan hesitantly. "Just for a moment." Ethan nodded, removing his hat as he followed her inside. Isabella lit a lamp, its warm glow illuminating a parlor that had been stripped of many of its furnishings but still retained the essence of the home she remembered. "They sold most of our things," she observed, running her hand over the back of her father's favorite chair, one of the few pieces that remained. "But the house itself is intact. You can make it a home again," Ethan said gently. Isabella turned to him, overwhelmed by the day's events. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Ashwood. You've given me back my father's good name, my home." "Ethan," he corrected with a small smile. "And you don't need to thank me, Miss Lawson." "Isabella," she offered in return, "and I do need to thank you. Without those letters, without your intervention, you would have found another way," Ethan said confidently. "I've seen your strength these past months. Whitfield underestimated you, as did many in this town." Isabella felt tears welling in her eyes for the first time that day, not tears of sorrow or fear, but of release. "Still, you risked much for a stranger." "Not entirely a stranger," Ethan admitted. "I've admired you from afar since I arrived in Black Hawk, your dignity in the face of adversity. It spoke volumes about your character." A blush warmed Isabella's cheeks. "You've been watching me." "Not in an improper way," Ethan hastened to assure her, his own face coloring. "I just noticed how you carried yourself, even when working at the hotel. Most people would have been broken by what you endured, but you weren't." Isabella was saved from having to respond by a knock at the still open door. Sheriff Taylor stood on the porch, looking apologetic for the interruption. "Miss Lawson, Mr. Ashwood, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I thought you should know. We've received a telegraph from the Denver office. It seems Mr. Whitfield is wanted in connection with similar schemes in Leadville and Central City. They're sending someone to collect him day after tomorrow." "That's good news," Ethan said. "He won't be troubling anyone else for a long time." The sheriff nodded. "Also, Miss Lawson, the bank manager would like to see you tomorrow morning, something about restoring your accounts." He shifted awkwardly. "This town owes you a great debt, miss. Your father, too. I hope you can forgive us for not seeing the truth sooner." "Thank you, Sheriff," Isabella said softly. "That means a lot to me." After the sheriff departed, a comfortable silence settled between Isabella and Ethan. Outside, the sounds of the town gradually quieted as Black Hawk prepared for night. "I should let you rest," Ethan said eventually. "It's been quite a day." "It has," Isabella agreed, surprised to find herself reluctant to see him leave. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "If you'd like," Ethan replied, a hopeful note in his voice. "Perhaps I could escort you to the bank. These kinds of matters can be intimidating." Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile in months. "I'd appreciate that very much." Ethan placed his hat back on his head, tipping it slightly. "Until tomorrow, then, Isabella." "Until tomorrow, Ethan." As she watched him walk down the path toward town, Isabella felt something unfamiliar stirring within her, a lightness, a sense of possibility that had been absent for too long. Today had been meant to mark her surrender to a life of quiet desperation. Instead, it had become the first day of her liberation. And perhaps, she thought as she closed the door of her family home, the beginning of something entirely unexpected. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Isabella's life. True to the sheriff's word, Whitfield was transported to Denver to face multiple charges of fraud and corruption. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that few expected him to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. As for Isabella, the town of Black Hawk seemed determined to make amends for its treatment of her and her father. The bank not only restored her accounts, but also offered her compensation for the months of lost income. Mayor Billings personally oversaw the legal proceedings that returned full ownership of her property to her, expediting what would normally have been a lengthy process. Most townspeople were genuinely contrite, though Isabella noticed that some who had been quickest to condemn her father now avoided meeting her eyes on the street. Forgiveness, she was learning, was a complicated thing necessary for her own peace of mind, but not something she could rush. Through it all, Ethan Ashwood remained a steadfast presence. True to his word, he had escorted her to the bank that first morning after Whitfield's arrest. In the days that followed, he found reasons to call at her home, bringing her a basket of fresh eggs from the Peterson ranch, offering to repair her porch steps, returning books he had borrowed from the town's small library. Isabella found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. After the betrayal and heartache of recent months, opening herself to new feelings seemed risky. Yet there was something about Ethan that inspired trust: his straightforward manner, his quiet integrity, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. 3 weeks after the day that should have been her wedding, Isabella was working in the small garden behind her house when she heard the now familiar sound of Ethan's footsteps on the path. "Good afternoon," he called, carrying what appeared to be a wooden crate. "Mrs. Peterson sent over some preserves. She's put up more than they can eat this winter." Isabella straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "That's very kind of her. Would you like some tea? I was about to take a break." Ethan's face brightened. "I'd like that very much." They settled on the back porch, the late summer sun casting dappled shadows through the branches of an old oak tree. Isabella poured tea into 2 cups that had belonged to her mother, part of a china set she'd managed to buy back from the general store owner who had purchased it during the sale of her family's belongings. "How are the negotiations going for your land purchase?" Isabella asked, having followed Ethan's efforts to buy the small ranch outside town. "Finalized yesterday," Ethan replied, unable to contain a grin. 160 acres, including the old Holbrook cabin. It needs work, but the bones are good." "Congratulations," Isabella exclaimed. "That's wonderful news. Thank you." Ethan's expression grew more serious. "Actually, that's partly why I came by today. I was hoping you might ride out there with me tomorrow. I'd value your opinion on the place." "My opinion?" Isabella asked, surprised. "I don't know the first thing about ranching." Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "But you know about making a home. That's what I want this place to be eventually. Not just a ranch, but a home." The implication in his words wasn't lost on Isabella. They had been circling each other these past weeks, their growing feelings evident but unspoken. This invitation felt like a step toward something more. "I'd be happy to see it," she said softly. Ethan's smile returned, and they lapsed into comfortable conversation about his plans for the property, the cattle he hoped to raise, improvements to the cabin, a garden plot similar to Isabella's own, As the afternoon waned, Ethan reluctantly rose to leave. I should get back to the Petersons. Still have chores to finish before I can call it my last day working for them. Of course, Isabella said, walking him to the front gate. What time shall we ride out tomorrow? Would mid-morning suit? Say 10 o'clock. The ride takes about 45 minutes at an easy pace. 10 o'clock is perfect, Isabella confirmed. I look forward to it. After Ethan departed, Isabella returned to her gardening with renewed energy, her mind filled with thoughts of tomorrow's excursion. It had been months since she'd ridden out of Black Hawk, and the prospect of seeing Ethan's new property, his future home, stirred an excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning dawned clear and mild, a perfect late summer day. Isabella dressed with particular care in a practical riding skirt and her best blouse, pinning her hair in a simple but flattering style. She packed a small basket with bread, cheese, and 2 slices of the apple pie she'd baked the previous evening. At precisely 10 o'clock, Ethan arrived with 2 horses, his own sturdy bay gelding, and a gentle-looking mare he'd borrowed from the livery stable. She's called Daisy, he explained as he helped Isabella mount. Mr. Jennings at the livery says she's as sweet-natured as they come. The ride out of town was pleasant, their conversation flowing easily as they followed a well-worn trail that wound through pine-covered hills. Isabella felt a sense of freedom she'd almost forgotten, the weight of recent months lifting with each mile they put between themselves and Black Hawk. There it is, Ethan said eventually, pointing toward a small valley that had opened up before them. The Ashwood Ranch. Isabella followed his gaze to where a modest cabin stood beside a clear running creek, surrounded by grassland that stretched to the base of the nearby mountains. It wasn't grand by any measure. The cabin was weathered, the corral beside it in need of repair, but the setting was breathtaking. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed. "It's beautiful." His face lit up at her approval. "You think so? It's not much yet, but with work." "I can see its potential," Isabella assured him as they rode closer. "The location is perfect, with water and good grazing land." They dismounted near the cabin, tying the horses to a hitching post that had seen better days. Ethan offered Isabella his arm as they approached the building. "I should warn you, it's been empty for almost a year," he said, suddenly seeming nervous. "It needs a thorough cleaning, and some of the furnishings didn't weather the abandonment well." "All homes need care," Isabella replied gently. "That's what makes them homes rather than just buildings." Ethan's smile returned as he pushed open the cabin door. Inside, the main room was larger than Isabella had expected, with a stone fireplace at one end and several windows that filled the space with light. A layer of dust covered everything, and a family of mice had clearly made themselves comfortable in one corner, but Isabella could immediately see the potential. "The previous owner built it himself," Ethan explained, moving to open a window and let in fresh air. "He and his wife raised 3 children here before they decided to move to Oregon." "They must have been happy here," Isabella observed, running her hand along the sturdy table that dominated the center of the room. "You can feel it in the craftsmanship." Ethan showed her the rest of the cabin: 2 small bedrooms, a basic kitchen area, and a root cellar dug beneath the floor. Every room needed work, but the structure itself was sound. "What do you think?" he asked when they had completed the tour, his expression hopeful but uncertain. "Be honest." Isabella took a moment to gather her thoughts, touched by how much her opinion clearly mattered to him. "I think it's wonderful, Ethan. Not because it's perfect, it isn't, not yet, but because of what it could become. It has good bones, as you said." Relief and pleasure washed over his features. "That's exactly how I feel. I know it's rough now, but I can see what it could be with time and effort." They took their lunch outside, spreading a blanket near the creek where they could enjoy the view while they ate. The pie was received with such enthusiasm that Isabella felt a disproportionate sense of pride. "This is delicious," Ethan declared, accepting a second slice. "Did your mother teach you to bake?" Isabella nodded, touched that he had asked about her family. "She did. She was wonderful in the kitchen, could make something special out of the simplest ingredients. My father used to say she could turn flour and water into ambrosia if she set her mind to it." "Tell me more about them," Ethan requested, his interest genuine. "Your parents." And so Isabella did, sharing stories of her childhood, of her mother's warmth and creativity, her father's quiet wisdom and unwavering integrity. It had been so long since she'd spoken of them with joy rather than grief, and she found the experience unexpectedly healing. "They sound like remarkable people," Ethan said when she finally fell silent. "I wish I could have known them better." "They would have liked you," Isabella told him honestly. "Especially my father. He valued straightforwardness above almost anything else." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the play of sunlight on the creek's surface. Eventually, Ethan began speaking of his own family parents who had died in a flu epidemic when he was 16, leaving him to make his own way in the world, and a younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in St. Louis. "I haven't seen Rebecca in almost 3 years," he admitted. "Being a Pinkerton detective meant constant travel. It's one of the reasons I decided to leave the agency. I was tired of never having a place to call home, people to come back to." "And now you'll have both," Isabella observed, gesturing to the cabin and surrounding land. "I hope so," Ethan agreed, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "Isabella, there's something I need to tell you." "Yes," she prompted when he hesitated. Ethan took a deep breath. "I wasn't entirely truthful about why I came to Black Hawk. Yes, I was tracking Whitfield, but I could have handed that information to the local Pinkerton office and moved on. I stayed because I met you." Isabella's eyes widened. "Me? But we hadn't even spoken until the day of the wedding." "Not directly, no," Ethan acknowledged. "But I saw you that first day in town, standing up to Whitfield at a town meeting when he was speaking against one of the smaller mine owners. You were so passionate, so forthright. Then I learned who you were, what you'd been through, and I was—" He paused, searching for the right word. "I was captivated." "Captivated," Isabella repeated softly, the word warming her from within. "I watched how you handled yourself after your father's death, how you worked at the hotel without complaint, held your head high despite everything. I've met a lot of people in my line of work, Isabella, but never anyone with your kind of strength and grace." Isabella was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by his confession. "I know this is forward of me," Ethan continued, his voice becoming more urgent. "We've only truly known each other for a few weeks, but I feel as though I've known you much longer. And I wanted you to understand why this place matters so much to me, why your opinion of it matters. Because I hope, someday, if I'm fortunate beyond deserving, it might be a home for both of us." There it was, the unspoken thing that had been growing between them, now given voice. Isabella felt her heart racing, a mixture of joy and trepidation flooding through her. "Ethan, you don't need to respond now," he hastened to add. "I know it's too soon. After everything you've been through, the last thing you need is pressure from me. I just wanted you to know where I stand, what I hope for." Isabella reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "Thank you for telling me, and thank you for understanding that I need time. But I want you to know that I care for you, Ethan, more than I thought possible after everything that's happened." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "That's more than I dared hope for today." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property. Ethan pointing out where he planned to expand the corral, build a proper barn, perhaps add another room to the cabin someday. Isabella found herself caught up in his enthusiasm, offering suggestions, imagining alongside him how the place might look with each improvement. As the shadows lengthened, signaling it was time to return to town, neither seemed eager to end the day. They rode back at a leisurely pace, the conversation now punctuated by comfortable silences that required no filling. At Isabella's gate, Ethan helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for coming today," he said softly. "Seeing the place through your eyes made it even more special." "Thank you for showing it to me," Isabella replied. "It's going to be a wonderful home, Ethan." He hesitated, then leaned forward and gently kissed her cheek, the touch brief but unmistakably tender. "Good night, Isabella." "Good night, Ethan." As she watched him ride toward the livery with the borrowed horse, Isabella touched her fingers to the spot where his lips had brushed her skin, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The day had changed something between them, moving their relationship from possibility to promise. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Ethan divided his time between working on his new property and helping Isabella restore her home in town. They took meals together often, sometimes at Isabella's house, occasionally at the hotel restaurant as a special treat. On Sundays after church, they would ride out to the ranch, where Isabella found herself increasingly involved in planning its development. Black Hawk watched their courtship with approving eyes, the town seeming to take pleasure in this positive outcome after the Whitfield affair. News eventually reached them that Harold Whitfield had been sentenced to 15 years in the state penitentiary, his empire of fraud collapsing as investigations revealed the full extent of his crimes. For Isabella, the knowledge that justice had been served brought closure, allowing her to focus on the future rather than the painful past. Her father's reputation had been fully restored, with the town council even voting to rename the small park near the bank in Joseph Lawson's honor. As autumn painted the surrounding mountains in gold and crimson, Ethan completed enough repairs to the ranch cabin to make it properly habitable. The day he officially moved in, Isabella helped him celebrate by cooking a special dinner in the newly refurbished kitchen. "A home needs a proper christening," she declared as she set a roast chicken on the table, accompanied by potatoes, carrots, and fresh bread. "I can't think of a better way," Ethan agreed, looking around the main room with satisfaction. The floors had been sanded and sealed, the windows fitted with new glass, the fireplace cleaned and tested for the coming winter. They ate by lamplight, discussing Ethan's plans for spring planting and the 2 milk cows he hoped to purchase before winter set in. As they lingered over coffee and the apple cobbler Isabella had brought for dessert, a comfortable silence settled between them. "I have something for you," Ethan said finally, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small wooden box. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Isabella's heart skipped as he placed the box in her hands. Opening it slowly, she found a delicate silver ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," Ethan explained, his voice suddenly husky with emotion. "My father gave it to her when he asked her to marry him. Rebecca has her wedding band, but Mother always said the engagement ring should go to the woman I chose to spend my life with." Isabella looked up, tears gathering in her eyes. "Ethan." He moved from his chair to kneel beside her, taking her hands in his. "Isabella Lawson, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but in every way that matters, my heart recognizes yours. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Isabella was transported back to that day in the church when she had stood in a wedding dress she didn't want, facing a future with a man she despised. The contrast between that moment and this one filled with genuine love and freely chosen made her heart overflow with gratitude. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strengthening as she repeated, "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When he rose to kiss her, Isabella felt as though her life had finally found its true beginning. They agreed on a spring wedding, giving them time to prepare both the ranch and themselves for their new life together. The news was received with enthusiasm in Black Hawk, with many of the town's women immediately offering assistance with wedding preparations. As winter blanketed the mountains in snow, Ethan continued to split his time between the ranch and town. The heavy snowfall sometimes made travel between the two locations difficult, leading to stretches of days when they couldn't see each other. During these separations, Isabella found herself more certain than ever of her feelings. Each reunion confirmed what her heart already knew, that Ethan Ashwood was the man she was meant to share her life with. Christmas brought a brief thaw, allowing Ethan to join Isabella and several other townspeople for a festive dinner at the mayor's home. Mayor Billings had become one of their strongest supporters, perhaps seeking to atone for his role in the Whitfield affair through his enthusiastic embrace of their engagement. "To new beginnings," he toasted that evening, raising his glass to the couple. "And to the finest addition our town could hope for in young Mr. Ashwood." January and February passed in a blur of wedding plans and preparations for spring planting. Isabella spent many evenings sewing her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk, with lace her mother had brought from Philadelphia years before. By March, the snow was beginning to retreat, revealing patches of earth eager for new growth. On the first truly mild day, Ethan rode into town with news that sent a ripple of excitement through Isabella. "The apple trees I ordered from Denver have arrived," he announced after greeting her with a kiss. 10 saplings ready for planting. I thought perhaps you might want to help me decide where they should go." Isabella was touched by his thoughtfulness, knowing how much she loved apples and the memories they held of her mother's orchard in Pennsylvania before the family moved west. "I'd love that." "When? How about tomorrow?" "The ground is soft enough for planting now, and they say we might get more snow next week." The following day found them on the ranch property, carefully measuring distances between saplings, digging holes, and settling each young tree into its new home. It was muddy, tiring work, but Isabella enjoyed every moment, especially when Ethan shared his vision of future harvests, of children climbing the branches of mature trees, of apple pies cooling on the windowsill of their home. Their home. The phrase still sent a thrill through Isabella each time she thought of it. In less than a month, she would be Isabella Ashwood, sharing this land, this life with the man who had saved her from a fate worse than loneliness. As they planted the last sapling, Ethan stepped back to admire their work. "One day, these will be the finest apple trees in the county," he declared. "One day," Isabella agreed, leaning against him as they surveyed the neat row of slender saplings. "And we'll be here to see it." He turned to her then, his eyes full of a love that still amazed her in its intensity and constancy. "That's what matters most," he said softly. "That we'll be here together, watching these trees grow, building our life season by season." Isabella reached up to touch his face, momentarily overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this point. From the darkest period of her life had emerged this unexpected gift, a love built on respect and understanding, promising a future brighter than any she had dared imagine after her father's death. "I love you, Ethan Ashwood," she said simply. His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "And I love you, Isabella Lawson, soon to be Ashwood." When their wedding day finally arrived in early April, the town of Black Hawk turned out in full regalia. The same church where Isabella had nearly been forced to marry Harold Whitfield was now transformed with spring flowers and ribbons, a place of joy rather than dread. As she prepared in the small back room, assisted by Sally from the Silver Dollar and Mrs. Peterson from the ranch, Isabella felt a profound sense of rightness. This was how a bride should feel, nervous but eager, certain of her choice, surrounded by well-wishers who genuinely celebrated her happiness. "Your father would be so proud," Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting the simple veil that crowned Isabella's dark hair. "And your mother, too." Isabella smiled, touching the locket around her neck that contained miniature portraits of both her parents. "I like to think they're here in spirit." When the music began, signaling it was time, Isabella took a deep breath and stepped into the church hallway. Mayor Billings waited to escort her, having offered to stand in for her father in the traditional role. "Ready, my dear?" he asked kindly. "More than ready," Isabella replied with confidence. As she walked down the aisle toward Ethan, who waited at the altar with an expression of wonder on his face, Isabella thought of that other day, nearly a year ago, when she had stood trembling in a wedding dress, facing a future of despair. How strange and wonderful that the interruption of that ceremony had led her here, to this moment, to this man. Ethan took her hands when she reached him, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're beautiful," he whispered, the words meant for her alone. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows spoken with clear voices that carried to the back of the packed church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was both tender and promising, sealing their commitment before God and the community that had become their extended family. The celebration afterwards spilled from the church hall into the streets of Black Hawk, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. As evening approached, Ethan led Isabella to where their horses waited, decorated with flowers and ribbons by well-meaning friends. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Ashwood?" he asked, his voice caressing her new name. Isabella looked around at the town that had seen her lowest moments and her highest joys, at the people who had abandoned her father but then sought redemption through their support of her new beginning. She felt nothing but gratitude for the journey, difficult though parts of it had been. "Yes," she said, turning back to her husband with a smile that held all her love and hope for their future. "Let's go home." They rode away amid cheers and well wishes, taking the now familiar trail to the ranch that awaited them. As they crested the final hill and saw their cabin in the valley below, windows glowing with lamplight left by friends who had prepared it for their arrival, Isabella felt a sense of completion. "Look," Ethan said, pointing to where their newly planted apple trees stood in silhouette against the sunset sky. "They're already starting to bud." Isabella squeezed his hand, seeing in those tender buds the promise of all that lay ahead: seasons of growth and harvest, years of building and nurturing, a lifetime of love that had begun in the most unexpected way. "New beginnings," she murmured, echoing Mayor Billings's Christmas toast. "The best kind," Ethan agreed, urging his horse forward toward home. As they rode the final distance together, Isabella thought of the words Ethan had spoken that fateful day at the church door. "She's marrying no one today." How right he had been, though neither of them could have known then where those words would lead, not to a life alone as she had feared in her darkest moments, not to a marriage of convenience or compromise. but to this, a union born of true love and mutual respect, a partnership that would weather whatever storms the future might bring. Isabella Lawson Ashwood lifted her face to the evening breeze, grateful beyond words for the man at her side and the life they would build together. The past, with all its pain, had led to this present joy, and the future stretched before them like the promising land surrounding their home, ready to be cultivated with patience, dedication, and above all, love.